Boker Tov, Denver, Erev Tov, Herzliya, and welcome to art lovers everywhere in between and all over the world. My name is Wayne Firestone. I'm the Executive Director of the America-Israel Friendship League. And today our Friends and Deeds series continues with this really special look and insight into Israeli art. We're excited to bring you a panel of experts on Israeli art from all over Israel in an intimate conversation that's not taking place in a museum or in a gallery where we would love to host you. But nonetheless, these you will see from photos of major exhibits, insights about these exhibits that the presenters have curated, and hope that you will one day actually get to visit in person. For everyone who's on this call today and joining us from around the world, whether it's on Zoom or on Facebook, we'd love to know where you're calling in from. If you want, just send us a quick chat, send us a quick note telling us where you're viewing and whether you've seen any of these works of art previously. We really do appreciate your taking the time during the day to join us. For anyone joining us live, also, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. I'm seeing people calling in already from Columbus, Ohio, from Delray Beach, Florida, from Brooklyn, Savannah, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois. Really wonderful to see the breadth of interest in this topic today. You can also, Modine, Israel, we have people just around the corner from our presenters as well. So make sure throughout the presentation, call in with any of your questions and we'll try to get to them, as many as we can anyway, by the end of the presentations. If you are on Facebook by chance, also you can host a watch party, which means all your friends who are looking for something interesting to do right now during perhaps their lunch hour or as they're waking up. In Costa Rica, I guess they're just waking up. We have our first visitor from outside the United States. You can have all your friends join in as well. Today, we have 4 outstanding presentations, so you're not going to just get to hear about art, you're going to actually get to see some of this. So let's jump into our presentations. I'm so thrilled to have Shaul Setter join us as the moderator for this panel. He knows each of the presenters intimately well. He also knows a little bit about the United States, having received and done his PhD at Berkeley here in the United States. He teaches comparative literature and aesthetic and political theory at Tel Aviv University and Bezalel Academy of Art and Design. He was an art critic for Haaretz and is now currently the editor of Theory and Criticism, a journal of critical theory published by the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. Shaul, I'm going to turn over to you. We're going to have a wonderful discussion. Please lead us off.
Thank you, Wayne. At the center of our event today is contemporary Israeli visual art. We're going to ask what are the challenges and obstacles Israeli artists, curators, and gallerists are facing today in a shaky political atmosphere, in an uncertain economic situation, in a pandemic that threatens to narrow the place of all cultural activities. Israeli art has some unique and some common features. It came into being, so has been claimed, against the background of Jewish iconoclasm, Jewish existence deprived of material culture and aesthetic tradition, opposed to hundreds of years of Western Christian culture. It has been strongly influenced by the Jewish national movement, Zionism. First, it took an integral part in it, then it distanced itself from it, and later also severely critiqued it. And in recent decades, the strengthening of an international art market and the globalization of art has made a significant mark on it, Israeli art becoming also an art production exported abroad. Taking all this into consideration, we're going to ask, what are the main directions and trends in contemporary Israeli art? How does it negotiate modernist values and local traditions, the secular and the theological, the aesthetic and the political? Or what are its achievements and what acute issues it raises? To discuss these questions, I'm joined here today by 4 curators who in the last years have curated some of the major exhibitions of Israeli art here and abroad. Ori Dessau, who joins us from Ghent, Belgium, has curated exhibitions in Israel and in Europe, and also writes extensively about art. Noemi Givon has been running for decades one of the most important art galleries in Tel Aviv, the Givon Art Gallery, where she also curates exhibitions there and also in the Givon Forum at Neve Tzedek. Dalit Matayahu, who is a senior curator of Israeli art at Tel Aviv Museum of Art, and Hila Cohen-Schneiderman, who is the chief curator at MoBY Museums of Bat Yam. So our event will have two parts. In the first one, each one of our discussants will present a recent exhibition he or she curated. And then, in the second part, we're going to have a discussion of some of the main questions regarding Israeli art that arise from these exhibitions. All of you are invited to write comments and questions throughout the presentations and then during the discussions, and we'll make an effort to address at least some of them. So the first presenter will be Ori. Ori, please.
Thank you, Shaul, for the great introduction. Thank you, Wayne. Hello, everybody. I always start my lectures or presentations about general issues such as Israeli art or art in general with a quote by no less than Gombrich in his famous book, The History of Art, which reads, there is no such thing as art, only artists. So I want to start with a very concrete, but nevertheless canonical example that in the form of the great oeuvre of Moshe Gershuni, who passed away in the last decade. And I would like to start by sharing with you some of the considerations that were at the heart of the exhibition I curated together with Udo Kittelmann around his work in Neue Nationalgalerie Berlin in 2014. So, so let me just start by saying that the show was focused on what art historians refer to as the second Gershuni since the 1980s. So we were focusing more on this part of the oeuvre, but nevertheless we started with a work from '79, which is a transitional work, which sits on the verge between the two Gershunis, the Gershuni until 1980, which is mainly referred to as the conceptual Gershuni, and the Gershuni after 1980, after representing Israel in the Venice Biennale, etc. So the work that we started with, it's before the Shoah, that you already confronted by in the lobby, is a text work in Hebrew, saying who's Zionist and who isn't. On the right side of the screen, you have who is Zionist in Hebrew. On the left side, who is Zionist, who isn't in Hebrew work. And I think it's a great example of Gershuni's use of language, which is also apparent in his later phase as a painter of in the medium of the eruptive stain, which nevertheless combines inscriptions inside his work. So what I wanted to show through this work is that on the face of it is it's a very simple or simplistic work. Divides the world into who is Zionist and who isn't, forces us to choose sides. Very explicit work, very categorical, very dichotomous, forcing us to choose side, to decide on the trajectory of history. But I think one should pay attention to the way Gershuni is not just using language as a medium of explicit statements, of dichotomous categorical statements, but also exposes the way in which language creates and constructs a meaning, because that the section who isn't is purely a linguistic construct. It doesn't exist in nature. It doesn't. It's something that is purely verbal, purely linguistic, and therefore it's artificial. Therefore, it's dependent on certain historical circumstances, conventions, ideologies, etc. So, while starting with a very explicit essentialist statement to decide who we are, what side do we take. Immediately thereafter, Gershuni is problematizing the medium of language and shows us that language itself is not transparent, but it creates meaning, and therefore it's an artificial construct, and therefore it can reflect also on the idea that Zionism is not an essential position, but also an artificial position. So let me maybe summarize it. Gershuni says who is Zionist and who isn't. So he divides the world to Zionism and anti-Zionism. He tells us that we have to choose sides. He tells us that the world is to be described in very explicit categorical terms. But then he also shows us that these things are very much artificial, and therefore maybe even Zionism is artificial. So this is how I wanted, this was the basic decision of how we welcomed the visitors into the exhibition. Shaul, if we can, yeah, so now we are inside the space. Also maybe a general comment on the way we constructed the exhibition. The exhibition took place in the famous Mies van der Rohe glass pavilion on the underground level, where it used to be the graphic cabinet for those who are interested. So how do you, and we decided to almost make this exhibition with no spaces between the paintings in order to show the flow or the intensity of the way Gershuni is working. If we can go back, if we can go to the last image, yes. So yes, this image, please. Yes. While thinking about the title of the exhibition, we knew that we want to take one of the Gershuni's titles, one of the painting, a title from one of his paintings, and we chose the No Father, No Mother series of paintings, which he did in 1998. And also, I think this is a great example of how Gershuni is using language and starts in a very declarative, explicit, categorical way. When he writes no father, no mother, when he imprints the surface with the words no father, no mother, he infers or implies or provides the painting with a speaker who is an orphan. He implies orphanage, and he implies a superfluous speaker, etc. But while digging into this, he also, while digging into this description of a person who has no father, no mother, we also came across the famous quote from Georg Buchner's Wojciech. Shaul, probably you know better, because we know Wojciech had few versions. I rely more on the version that Werner Herzog was using in his adaptation. But nevertheless, the last monologue of the play is Wojciech speaks about imagine a world where, or imagine me walking in a world with no father and no mother. So while declaring on himself as an orphan, and in the sense and in the context of an Israeli artist that has no roots in modern or in European modernism, I think this statement has a great value, great added value, because it also positions or reflects on the position of art making in Israel that has no context to refer to. So while doing it, while declaring on himself as superfluous, as an orphan, as somebody who has no roots in tradition, who has no background, he also creates an affinity to no less than Buchner and the role he played in German Romanticism. So by declaring on himself by verifying himself as an orphan, as somebody who has no father, no mother, he creates his own father, which is Georg Buchner, and situates himself and positions himself and contextualizes himself in the context of German Romanticism, and as the starting point for many for European modernism, etc.
Okay, thank you, Oli. The next speaker will be Noemi. Noemi, please.
Hello, everyone. I have established this place, Givon Art Forum, in order to show how collection can be constructed during the years of Israeli modern art, more or less as of the 20s until now. Here, and I have made this presentation so that you can review it afterwards with the text and with and to see the whole exhibition. There are two exhibitions here. One titled Measure, and the current one is titled Agenda. Age, it's my age, and NDA, it's non-exclusion agreement. And what I want to say here, that there is quite a special secret in the art language, the secret which I choose to depict and show to others. Those two exhibitions do a lot with materials, water, here in the invitation, the Micha Ullman Connected Vessels. They do, you can see the text which I wrote about it. We see Nuri David here with works on the floor that remind you of clothing, which isn't quite so. In the next picture, we see Matayahu with this curtain that was also on show in Japan in a very important place. We see Ullman again with watercolors of connected vessels. Here we see Pierre Wig, André Parigno, Yara Tzach, Gabi Krichelli, all with very different materials, depicting the disappearance and the existing and non-existing of the object. The whole idea of this show was whether the object is interfering the sculpture language, or is it adding anything to the sculpture language, and I wanted to differ between object and sculpture. We see Che Golombek, Avi Sabach, at the back here, Moshe Gershuni also with beehives. Okay, we are now with Agenda H and the A. We have a very good show starting in 1952 with Zaritsky, Joseph Zaritsky, the founder of New Horizons, who also did the Venice Biennale in the first year, 1948. We have the text which I wrote, which is meant to be for the YouTube viewers later when it comes on. Leo Tamim you have to click on Leo Tamim, is the youngest artist in this show. Can we hear? Could we hear this?
There's a problem in hearing it.
Now you were supposed to click on this.
Never mind.
Yes, we still need.
Holy Future. Guitar topstal.
This we have
Silent chemistry. Jolly attic. Prepared passion.
we are playing
Manual hobby.
להיות תמים איזה
Fucking fortnight.
And so he's the youngest in the Pesach Slabowski actually was born in Detroit. He came to Israel in the 70s. He's not a part in the movement in Israeli art. I would say in a movement by himself. He passed away last year, unfortunately. Avi Sabach, who lives now in Portugal. Micha Ullman, it's a chair with free sand thrown on the chair. The chair was removed and the sand was shoveled, and that created the work. We have a beautiful sculpture by him as well, made of free sand. Here is the Zaritsky and Rafi Lavi, left of the Zaritsky. If we can see the sculpture of Micha Ullman, would be nice. But, here we see Rafi Lavi from 1960. Yossi Breger was the head of the photography department at Bezalel. We made a tribute here. We are showing 3 works by him. We can go next. Here we have, on the left-hand side, we have Michal Ne'eman and Moshe Gershuni on the right. You can see the word who can read it. Hebrew, נער, נער הייתי וגם זקנתי ולא ראיתי צדיק נעזב וזרעו מבקש לחם. Here is also a young artist, Israel Kabbalah, which is who has a show now in Tel Aviv in the gallery of the Midrasha. These are all made on canvas. Here is Sigalit Landau, Gdansk. It's titled Salted Lake in Gdansk, the city of Lech Walesa. And here she brought shoes from the Dead Sea covered with salt, and she had put it on the lake in order for them to sink in. This was presented at her show at the Venice Biennale when she represented Israel. Nuri David, again, this is a new set of works which she did about a year or 2 years ago. Here is again Pesach Slabowski with the assemblages, also is checking out between object and sculpture and what do you do with the objet trouvé, which he did. Eitan Ben Moshe also uses found materials from his environment. He puts them in a light box. And this is the last work in this show agenda.
Okay, thank you, Noemi. And the next speaker is Dalit Matayahu. Dalit.
Dalit needs to unmute.
Dalit?
Okay. Now you hear me?
I hear you, yeah. Go ahead,
Okay.
thanks.
Thank you. Mass was the first exhibition I curated in my role as a senior curator of Israeli art. Therefore, it can be said that it embodies statement of intent or thought about the nature and essence of Israeli art. As much as we can talk about art exhibition or art in this manner. The Gordian knot between Israeli art and the establishment of the nation derives its symbolic, almost literal character. Landscapes, paintings, or portraits as the embodiment of the connection to the land and the rejection of the diasporic past. Later abstraction processes that also carry traces of locality in spite of the desire to be universal. I point out this point of departure because of the narrative, almost storytelling nature of Israeli art from the moment of its origin and its persistence and insistent search it has revealed throughout its history after a collective and personal identities. I might add also, I'm referring to art criticism and the way we were taught to look at Israeli art, emphasizing what the image represents instead of directing the gaze to materiality and the modes of appearance of the artistic object. So to a large extent, the exhibition provided me a platform to think about overcoming representation, the places where the work is not about anything, but the thing itself. There were two defining moments for me regarding this project. The first was working with the artist Joshua Neustein, American-Israel artist, on an exhibition he curated at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art and dealt with the medium of oil chalk, of panda, in Israeli art. What seems almost self-evident was raised in this exhibition as a radical suggestion dealing with the Israeli art not through thematic thinking, but through materiality. The second moment was a serious car accident that I underwent and completely changed my perception of art. The notion of the accident is a sort of a thread in this exhibition, and it is important for me to consider its meaning. I'm about to speak about a car accident, but it can be any major trauma, any deep disruption, or in the positive sense, any miracle, like you see in front of you, that happens to us against what we expected or known. And there's this moment that we are on our way, convinced that our lives are in our hands, under our control. And in one moment, instantly, everything turns upside down. This moment holds an immense intensity because you know that everything has changed completely. And at the same time, how arbitrary it all is. That this is what is happening now, but at the same time could have been completely different. What interests me is how art can relate to this moment. What its abilities to act against it or in relation to it. Because the uniqueness of art is to appeal to the silent moments. The next stage, so to speak, of the accident is the loss of perspective. Everything becomes close, too close. And I compare this moment to the very act of creation itself, to the uncontrollable moments, to the contingent moments of the material, and to the non-interpretive moment. You are within the experience and materiality is acting upon you. I believe that every artist or any person deeply immersed in thought or action meets this feeling that the authority or ownership of your own work is taken from you. It's a very intimate and very secret moment. The last moment of the accident is the moment when you face a twisted object and ask yourself, how the hell did we get here? In other words, The exhibition basically presents the question of controlling the subject in the creative process, searching for non-sovereign moments. In a way, it's quite a tricky question, because art at the end or from its beginning is a controlled act. And I did not search for works that were done from ecstatic, uncontrolled way. On the contrary, the exhibition presents very restrained works that hold abstract moments or lack of hold. In the beginning of the presentation, there was this quote from Samuel Beckett. You don't have to go, I'll read it to you. One can only speak of what is in front of him, and that now is simply the mess. Shaul, if I have more, if
2
I
minutes.
have time,
yeah.
2 minutes, okay. Okay, it is not a simple task conveying a special experience into words. And I suppose the long introduction has not yet provided the connection between the ideas and the works of art in the exhibition space. So let's take, for example, the work of Chaim Duell-Lusky, whose conceptual and practical practice in photography raised many questions, but one of them, can an accident be photographed? Lusky's art presents the gap between horizontal and vertical photography, meaning the gap between the representation of reality, what is in front of us, and the surrender to the occurrence, to the event. Chaim's work tried to document a trauma that no longer exists, the traces of an event that are no longer there. The work tries to capture a significant political event in Israel, the Wadi Salib events, series of street demonstrations and riots that took place in 1959 in the Wadi Salib neighborhood, a neighborhood that was originally an Arab neighborhood whose inhabitants abandoned it during the War of Independence. Immediately after the war, the abandoned houses were expropriated, and the government settled mostly immigrants from the Maghreb, from North Africa, Jews from North Africa. The events were social rebellion against the provision and discrimination against a sectarian background and against the MoBY establishment that ruled the country in those days. The pots you see scattered in the gallery are actually cameras where the photo paper is placed horizontally, and around the pot there are holes through which the light enters and burns the photo paper. So the photos you see on the wall are actually traces of a simultaneous event of several accidents of light. The artist places the camera many years later on the land of Wadi Salib and creates an event in which the light gives its testimony. For me, this is a key work to understand the ways in which art can embody the most literal political ideas, not in a manifest or literal way, but through the material accident that it can produce. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dalit. And the last presenter is Hila Cohen-Schneiderman. Hila. Unmute.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm the chief curator of MoBY Museums of Bat Yam. It's actually a cluster of 3 museums, 3 houses in the city of Bat Yam. Bat Yam is actually a rather small city, a coastal city south to Tel Aviv, Jaffa, and is defined as a socioeconomic periphery, although it has a really great location, of course, and only 2.5 kilometers from the north to the south, and holds 160,000 inhabitants, so it's very dense. And the small blue dot that you see is actually Bat Yam Museum of Art. It's the main venue of the three clusters. So Bat Yam Museum of Modern Arts was opened in 1962 as part of the cultural complex of Ramat Yosef neighborhood that was altogether planned by a very important architect called Yitzhak Firestone. And the museum, as you can see, was a brutalist pavilion, and it was actually connected to a water tower with 4 floors that functioned as an artist studio. So the idea was not only to present art in a very small city, but rather to create places for artists to live and create in. But 20 years ago, the nature of the museum had changed architecturally and also content-wise, while the modern museum turned into a contemporary art museum. And you can see that it's white. It looks like it's in Miami, not like it's in Bat Yam, or like it's a small, maybe mini Guggenheim. And this change led to a conflict, I would say, with the place where the museum is located at. Because as I told you, Bat Yam is a very poor city, actually, defined, although it's very central, as a socioeconomic periphery. And the question that I started to ask myself, and I'm working in the museum for the last 2 years, was, does art have a place in a city that is defined as a socioeconomic periphery, while most of the guests that are coming to the museum, most of the visitors are coming from out of the city, mainly from Tel Aviv, but not necessarily, and not so much of them are the inhabitants of the city itself. And that brought me to a questions of beliefs, and I curated a trilogy of 3 exhibitions that dealt with the connection between art and belief. And the third one was the believers. In Hebrew, there's a very interesting connection between the word artist, means oman, to the word emunah, or omanut. Amen, emunah, omanut, omanim. It's all the same root. And you don't find it actually, not in English, not in Arabic, not even in Russian. So it's very unique to the Hebrew language. And I started to ask myself, what is the deep connection between artist and belief, between Oman, Emunah, and Omanut? So this is the main, in the entrance space to the museum. And I turned it into like a small temple, you can say. And in this exhibition, I search for artists that are dealing with questions of belief in their practice, or that their works could be considered as a work of art or work of belief. And I gathered together 3 generations, you can say, of believing artists. So you can see in the same space, Moshe Gershuni, that Ori Dessau had discussed earlier. Yael Burstein, you can consider her as a mid-career artist, and Lee Turgeman, which is a young artist. And I can say that I search for the energy that the object holds within them. I truly believe that when artists create a work of art, they insert to the objects this kind of energy. And another interesting thing in the works in the exhibition, that many of them was created in processes while the artists were bowing, were kneeling. So when you bow or when you kneel, it's the only point actually when your heart is above your brain. Usually our brain is higher than our heart, and while bowing, the relation is changed. And I think that the artists that work in this realm have a sense of humbleness, that they know that the creation forces are moving through them. It's not their own, it's not the ego that is creating, but it's a much wider and extremely strong forces that are going through them and create the work of art. So the idea of the floor, you could say, has a very intense role in the exhibition. This is another image from Gershuni's series that's called For Serious Song, and was about a very Christian text, but in the painting itself, you can see a connection between Islam Judaism, and also Christianity altogether. So this is, for instance, an installation of Matayahu. You could see a floor piece, very dreamy, with the force of the moon in the heart of it. But you can see here also a question about time, about ancientness and primeval forces. So it's like a clock without dials. It was created from clay. And another major artist, also Avi Sabach. You saw his works while Noemi Givon spoke. So Avi, he's painting on the floor. And not only he is usually painting on the floor, he's usually painting in darkness. So he doesn't really see what he paints. So he just letting, again, the force go through him. So this is kind of a snake, a sign of metamorphosis. This is a Ranave, young artist that, again, is about ancient forces and pagan forces. For the sound piece and wooden sculptures. And last is Chen Cohen. Chen Cohen is thinking in her art about disease. And a disease is a moment where you acknowledge that there are forces that are stronger than you. And you usually turn to ask for aid or help from this greater force. So just to conclude, for me, to curate in a place like Bat Yam is always asking myself where I'm at. And although the exhibitions are totally about art, regarding art, they are also a way to address the reality in which the museum also exists in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Hila. Thank you, all four of you, for this very interesting and varied presentations. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open the floor for discussion. I'm going just to remind our viewers what we saw. So we saw one exhibition of one of the prominent artists in Israel, Moshe Gershuni. Then we saw two group exhibitions in museums. We saw Dalit's exhibition about mass, accident, disruption, and we saw now Hila's exhibition about the believers and theology, and in between we saw Noemi's independent exhibition from her art about the future, the past and present and future of modernist art. So I want to ask the four of you a question that I think is in the core of Israeli art. And it is about the tension between the modernist, conceptual, maybe even universalist tendencies of Israeli art, on the one hand, and the other hand, the more local, maybe theological, maybe Jewish, maybe biblical traditions that are put into those artistic experiences. So we have Joseph Flaschner asking about the role of Bible in Israeli modern art, and I want you to touch on that question. What is modernist? What is not modernist? What is traditional? How does tradition takes a role in this artistic endeavor?
Yes, I can start if none of our friends.
Yeah, you. Mm-hmm.
So I would say few things. As I said, I usually avoid these generalizations. I also don't use the term Israeli art. I use the term art in Israel, or Israeli artist. And then there is a question, what is Israel and who is Israeli? And of course, on this background, who is Jewish? Which is the core question on which the jurisdictional system of Israel is based upon. But so I would say a few things that are more like lines of thought that guide me when I try to think about what is the meaning of doing art or showing art or communicating art in the Israeli context. So we have this. So first, I refer to Israel as a Jewish avant-garde. It's something that appropriated. It is an entity or some kind of historical move, historical political hegemony that took appropriated the Jewish terminology or the Jewish thematics, let's call it, and redid it or reinterpreted in a modern form, let's call it. At least historically or fundamentally, this was the case. This is one thing. Second thing, on this background, what is the meaning to try to be avant-garde when you have a revolutionary regime that took a tradition as its and reinterpreted it? This is one thing. Second thing, I think let's take something that was very prominent in the Western art discourse of the last 3 decades, which it is a term coined by Nicolas Bourriot and Jérôme Sans, relational aesthetics. Relational aesthetics means that there is no object, there is some kind of social structure or social happening that is the extension of the object. So art has no physical outcome, but it has some kind of social interpersonal interaction as its statement. And this kind of approach implies the boundlessness of contemporary art, or the idea of having no borders, having no contour of an object as the end of art.
Okay, so let me cut you here and go maybe to Dalit, because I think that what Dalit tried to do in her exhibition is about that questioning the status of the object of art. The object of art is becoming an accident, a disruption within a greater plan. So can you say something about that?
Yes, but I would like to relate relate to the question that was asked, because it's very interesting, because the Israeli art in many ways pushed out any trend or any genre that was not aligned with the modernist conceptions that demanded the secular, non-figurative space. And this, the aversion of that, I can give an example, because in only a few years from now, you couldn't hang on the same wall a painting by Streifman or Zaritsky next to a painting by Mordechai Ardon, which is also, of course, an abstract art, but that deals with mysticism and Jewish mysticism. So it's something that was very, we have to understand that today we can raise many questions, many topics that were not allowed or were pushed out.
Okay, Noemi, what do you think about that? About putting Zaritsky next to, or Ardon next to Zaritsky?
And unmute.
Unmute.
It's exactly what I want to show here in Givon. There is a conflict. The conflict arises, Ori also pointed out. But we have to think of ourselves as a very new art world. What is our whole art history is something like 120 years. We have to think every time what we are up against, especially that the information that we get today is vast. And an artist today has to, at every given moment, he has to look at art in the whole. And the emergence of art from every direction when you go to the Biennale. So if you want to I think we have to think, and Dalit herself in a meeting here said that Israeli art exists, and this is the main thing for us. Once there is Israeli art, and it exists, and it's kicking, and I mean it is disproportional to the society. When you think of the numbers of Israelis versus the numbers of artists, we must be amazed that there is so much doing and so many currents. If we want to talk about, this goes more philosophically, there are currents, there are undercurrents, there is continuation of what you say about how you hang. I do exactly this confrontation here in my space. And what's more, the Israeli art is not homogenic. There is not an art movement that it's not an omelette from 10 eggs. It is really that the Israeli artist is an individualist.
It's a big pizza.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an omelette, it's a pizza.
It is such an individualist in Israeli artist. When you look at art elsewhere, you think they are all singing on the same flute. And so, and in Israel, it isn't like that. You don't expect from this originality.
Yes, I wanted to say that, like, I think that in Israel, most of the artists are very religious, but they create their own religion. So in that way, they are still very individuals. And for a long time, there was a rupture between biblical origins, between more local myth. And I think that in this manner, the search after spiritualism is universal. But it has a very interesting implementation here in Israel, which is already so charged, you know, in these kind of contents.
So
Exactly.
in what you're doing, you are actually looking into spiritual traditions that are not only Jewish, right? So you're trying to think about spiritual tradition as something that in a way can not only localize the different aspects of Israeli art or art in Israel, but actually to connect it to other traditions in different places.
Exactly, and you can see today in Biennales and Documenta and so on, like in the biggest exhibitions around the world, this is a highly hot, you know, topic. And it's not, I think that the search today after spiritualism is worldwide. And, you know, of course, there could be all kinds of opinion about it, but I think that in the end, it's all from the same origin. It's all from the same place that we're in search of, around meaning, the question on the universe, on greater forces. So this is a joint endeavor, but each and every artist addresses it from its own, you know, point of view. And I say that artists are religious because they create their own ceremonies, they create their own practice, they create their own laws, they create their own fathers and mother in order to betray them. So there's something highly committed in being an artist.
On the other hand, there is something iconoclastic about art.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that when Ori showed us the his Gershuni exhibition, it was obvious that Gershuni is iconoclastic in so many ways to so many traditions, including to artistic tradition, including to the traditions that he took part in the late 60s and 70s, right, Ori? So,
yes,
so I think.
But also he is the greatest believer of all Israeli artists. Not only Israeli, actually. I think that Gershuni is one of the greatest believers that ever exist. And I think that he's also a founding father today. And you can see many Israeli artists that really relates to him in his energy, in his contents, in his way of that his art in the end is timeless. It's really powerful in that manner.
Okay, so I want to ask you another question. It's a question about the challenges. So what are the challenges that, you know, art in Israel or Israeli artists face today? What are, and maybe these are challenges that are common to other artists in other arenas. But what when you think about, and also you as a curator, when you think about what is the main, or what is the main challenge today for art, for that art that we saw that changed so radically from the 60s and 70s to our days, right? That's what I think Oli talked about when he talked about relational aesthetics. I mean, things that we didn't imagine that would be considered as art are today part of the main, like, within the artistic practices. So how do you see, this is, we're going to wrap up. So how do you think the challenges, or one challenge that you are facing today in your practice?
Maybe just to, what I say now is ad hoc. Huh? It's not I can change my opinion or give a different entry to the topic tomorrow. But nevertheless, I started to speak about this boundlessness that was characterizing contemporary art through the notion of relational aesthetics and art as social structure. In Israel, I think the challenge is opposite. Huh? How do you work under the conditions of boundless under the preconditions of boundlessness of a country with no borders, of a country that is all all being is very diffusive. Huh? So I think in this context, unlike the boundlessness that was conducted through relational aesthetics in the West, in Israel, I think the challenge is opposite. How you establish borders in a way, how you establish the autonomy of the space of art, the aesthetic field, that it will not be swallowed by the state, by the Zionist indoctrination. I think in Israel,
signification in large.
Yeah, sorry.
And political signification in large, right?
Voilà. Yes, exactly. So I think in Israel there is this specific challenge, and of course.
Okay, Dalit.
Well, I'm after Ori. I think this is a great opportunity to embrace peripherality. And if we think about the way we see, there's the peripheral vision, or the eccentric vision, and the central vision. And I think that the peripheral or the eccentric vision can help us locate movement, and mainly I know about the eccentric vision or the peripheral that is very sharpened in dark times or in darkness. So maybe it's a good metaphor.
Interesting. Hila?
As I see it, I think that
on the periphery,
art in Israel is so interesting and so rich. It always amazes me. It's such a small scene, and at the same time, it's intense and layered. And really, I cannot get enough, from Israeli artists. Or from artists in Israel, like always said. I think that the main problem is problem of funding, of state support in cultural venues, but directly in artists. There is no market in Israel. There are not enough collectors that support artists. Museums are battling on their own life, and I think that artists really need all the support they can get. So for me, this is the greatest challenge, and I always think, how can I support more in artists as an institution in the end?
Okay, thank you. And Noemi, last, not least. Yeah.
First of all, I agree both with Hila and Dalit and Ori, of course. Center and periphery was always our task to try to link it and work in a kind of anyway, local art has to be supported by the government and by people. But we have to love art. And once art is being loved and understood, our chances are much better, and not to have all those burdens coming from the political. And I'm very happy to see that only very few artists are mingling in politics. In this universality has won this game. So it's universality versus local meanings, and I think we will come out of this as winners. I believe in our artists. I've always believed in that.
Okay, thank you. So the sun is setting now in Tel Aviv. I want to thank Dessau, Hila, Cohen-Schneiderman, Dalit, Matayahu, and Noemi Givon for giving us a glimpse of contemporary Israeli art, and to thank all of you who watched us and listened to us. And I hope you got some clues about what's going on now and what to look for. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. And
the
sun is just rising here on the other side of the pond, and certainly this conversation helps us not only get through the days, but it helps us think about what is kicking in Israel. Even though we've got, as I guess paraphrasing Dalit, we have a mess in front of us. And we know that the many artists who you work with and will curate exhibits in the future are right now looking at a mess and creating new works of art that none of us can even imagine today. That's part of the genius of the Israeli art scene and of Israeli society, and really one of the things we wanted to capture on this series. The idea that friends and deeds can share from their hearts, can share from their experiences, can share from their pain, can share from the mess that's in front of them, what can then enlighten, what can then inspire, what can then create a conversation, even with the challenges and with the distances between us. So we are very grateful to all of you for sharing from the works that you've curated in the past. It gives us only a glimmer of what may be coming for the Israeli art scene in the future out of this particular mess. And it also gives us another realm in which we see friendship between America and Israel having a renaissance, frankly, in this period. We're now probably in our 25th live webinar between Israel and the United States during this period. This coming weekend on Sunday, we'll have a photojournalist showing us images from both Israel and New York, both in pain and in celebration. On July 4th, Independence Day weekend, on July 5th to be exact, on Sunday, we'll have the Israeli Philharmonic playing songs of inspiration. So we're watching literally how artists and creators in Israel and in the United States are interacting and supporting one another during this difficult time. Thanks everyone for being with us. Thanks to all the panelists. We look forward to a summer of possibility and of hope through these artist voices. Please join us again.